Lakers for Life Offseason Extended Hitter Part 1, where we're going to set up what should be a very exciting offseason for not only the Lakers, but the entire NBA. Before we get into it, if you enjoy the content, like, subscribe, and definitely leave your comments. If something strikes you, you either like it, you hate it, drop a comment and debate it. I love to engage with the community. So I'll engage back. But let's get into it. So before we start talking about players and trades and who's going to stay and who's going to be shipped out, I think we got to get to the basis of what are our guiding principles to this offseason for the Lakers, right? And it starts with our identity, establishing that, and then getting alignment around that, right? From Rob to JJ to Luka, who's now our centerpiece, right? Moving forward. So when we start with alignment, I'm sorry, then we're going to get into alignment, right? But when we start with identity, what team do the Lakers want to be? So there's a couple things here. We thought that, Luka, LeBron, and Austin Reaves was going to be a potent offense. Offense wasn't going to be a problem. We have some savants in the lineup. Austin Reaves is a great, kind of glue guy that can play with both. But it just didn't seem like the offense clicked. And, there's things that we can kind of defer from. And that's, we were playing a lot of small ball. So that was kind of our ethos for a while. We only had one center, and that was Jackson Hayes. We had Koloko and Jemison, but JJ really ran with Hayes for the regular season. And then he dropped out of the rotation completely in the playoffs because, bonehead plays, picking up fouls. So really when it comes to figuring out our identity, will having a center unlock that offense that we expect from Luka, LeBron, and Reaves? Do we need more shooters on the roster? Are we going to have a defensive aspect to the team as well too? We were a great defensive team in the regular season, top in the league for a stretch of 20 plus games, and Hayes was in that kind of semblance of that team. That was a really good defense, but we saw it completely disappear in the playoffs, right? So now you're seeing where we have a bit of conflicting kind of things. Are we going to be a defensive minded team? Are we going to be a very potent offense that can play good team defense to get us by, right? So establishing that identity is going to be key. And that starts with JJ Redick, right? On here are the pieces I'm missing to be X, Y, and Z in terms of the team I want to be, right? So they have to really kind of figure that out. And I think there's an opportunity to be great on both the offensive and defensive side of the ball. But that identity needs to be established and established quick. And that goes back into alignment, right? And this, not only can we establish an identity at JJ's level as a coach, but how are Luka, Rob aligning to that guiding principle that JJ's given, right? So, a big concerning point that I bring up was, we needed a center. Everyone and their moms knew we needed a center. But in that, Rob signed one, he traded for Mark Williams, which was a surprise, right? He got the center. The medicals didn't go well. Okay, we rescind the trade. Off we go. Then, Alex Len gets on the market and we sign him. And the issue with that is we didn't play him. Alex Len had one game and it was done after that. He was never playing again. And even in the playoffs, we played Maxi Kleber, who hasn't played in 4 months, over Alex Len while Hayes was getting benched. And Rob had a quote that said, "We thought Alex Len was a good player. The coach decided not to play him," which is a big disconnect, right? Alex Len is not a good player. But if that's what Rob is thinking as a GM is good, there's no alignment in what we needed in a center, right? So That example alone is very important for JJ, Rob, and even Luca now because he's a big proponent of having that vertical lob threat, which we'll get into, at the center position to probably unlock the offense we thought ideally could be, but didn't see because we were playing just a ridiculous amount of small ball and overworking our players in the playoffs. But um, that example, it really points to, they need to be on the same page of what type of player, the archetype and DNA of that player, right? And then looking at the options that are out there in the free agent market or via trade, right? It can't be these siloed, disparate. Well, I thought he was a good player. You just didn't play him. Luca, you're not getting him the ball. Or Luca's going, this is not the center I need. And JJ is going, this is the exact center we wanted. And you need to run this offense with him. I think that's going to be big. And that's going to set the table. I mean, there was that whole rumor that came out earlier upon the Lakers' exit from the playoffs of Luka, JJ, and Rob coming out of a restaurant in Hollywood, Craig's, and Rob had a big binder with him, right? Is it players? What was it? We don't know. But at least there was a meeting, and that alignment needs to happen. So identity and alignment. I mean, Laker Nation, you tell me what identity we're trying to go for as a team. If you made it this far, drop the comment. Let me know what identity should we be going for. I love the swarming defense. We need more two-way players for that. I do think with adding a rim protector, you can put more pressure on the perimeter and give a little bit of support to the players that are out on the perimeter, the DFSs, the Ruiz if we keep them, right? We do need a rebounder. That's going to help. And we saw that our offense as well really fueled the defense too. So we need to make sure that we have a mix of players that can also fit within that Luka system, but still play on the other end. So you can see that this is a jigsaw puzzle, but that's very important that we identify what identity are we going for. I mean, we see that there's two big lineups now in the NBA, right? We saw the Rockets have their two bigs with Alperen Şengün and Steven Adams. Minnesota had Rudy Gobert, Naz Reid, Julius Randle, right? OKC has Chet Holmgren and Isaiah Hartenstein. Denver's got some bigs, right? In Jokic and Gordon. So that 2020 model, we had an identity. That was probably the only time I've seen us have a really formidable identity. This is who the Lakers are. They're big, they play defense hard, and they are going to grind out W's, and we have two great offensive players in AD and LeBron during that time, but players that could shoot from the perimeter, but also that could play defense. I mean, getting back to that type of ethos, maybe it's not the two bigs because we have Luka, but establishing this is who we are as a team, and we're going to work every day to become that team and be the best with that identity, I think is super important to establish before we get into the rest of the offseason, right? Because we can throw off a bunch of players, but they've got to fit within a mold. So we spent some time on that. We got into some of the needs, right? We know center is the number one priority for this team. We saw what a lack of a center did with a big team like Minnesota in the playoffs. We were not able to rebound. We were not able to get out in transition. We were playing hard defense and not finishing possessions, and Minnesota just grinded it out. Those fourth quarters, still getting PTSD over that, but a center is big. And what we've heard is, Luka wants a vertical lob threat. We also need rim protection and, some semblance of defensive IQ, right? To name off the top three things, right? So when you start to think of that type of center and the whole league knows what we want and what we need, it's going to be difficult, right? But a center, number one, we need a center on this roster. Not even just one. We need multiple centers on this roster. Koloko and Jemison were there. I thought we should have brought them into our playoff roster, at least one of them. Maybe Koloko. Jemison brought more toughness, so we could have had that mix between him and Hayes. But, they spent so much time in the year with us and we didn't move them to the playoffs. What are we doing in terms of player development, right? So if you don't get that top tier center, which we'll get into how you even get those types of centers, right? You need to focus on the player development. We need to see more confidence getting instilled in these players from the G League or, those non-name brand players that we know can play, but we're developing through the season to be producers, right? We're seeing Indiana have so much depth, and it's not like they have name brand players. Granted, they were high pedigree in college, some were decent picks, but there's development happening there, and they're young, they're athletic. We need to kind of come up with that same type of strategy, right? And JJ harped on player development, but I didn't see it. Jackson Hayes had his run, and he played decent during the season. I think he surprised a bunch of us, but you're supposed to take that development and let it really come to fruition or manifest in the playoffs, and we just cut it off. So when we think about that identity too, which we talked about, is it a mix of young players that we get from the G League that we're making two ways with a purpose, right? Are we signing vet mins, where there's not so much development? We're getting, players that are going to be ready to go. We don't have a lot of young youth. Dalton Connect is probably our highly regarded young player, but we did not really even see him getting developed during the season, right? He was out of the rotation for a while. JJ said he could win us a few games in the playoffs, and we saw none of him, right? So a year where we could have given him some time, some reps, really work out the kinks. We know he's not a great defensive player, but, can we optimize his strengths? We didn't necessarily see that. So, we need to figure out what we're going to do in terms of youth if we're not getting those name brand centers out there that are on the market or via trade, right? And that goes with the second thing. Outside of a center, there's two-way wings. The whole league wants two-way wings. So that's a very hard thing to get via trade. You're going to have to trade a lot of assets, and we'll get into our assets. We don't have very many, right? But that goes back into the player development. If we get a couple centers on the market from, a vet min or one of the exceptions that we use, we need to develop our players. And I'm hoping we see, if we have to reset, maybe it's not Jemison, maybe it's not Koloko, maybe switch one out, but let's develop with the purpose. And I think that's what we're going to need to do from a two-way standpoint too, is, you can go try to trade for a two-way player, but, are you going to get the player you want? Do we have the players to get a top-tier two-way player? Probably not. So how do we work on the margins and develop that? Whether it be a second-round draft pick. We're known for undrafted players, and putting them into our G League system. But JJ needs to develop with a purpose going to next year, is, seeing how hard it's going to be to build a roster with what we have. And that goes into, it's not going to be easy. I'm seeing so much stuff on X right now of, we're going to go get Claxton, going to get Gafford. Here's a list of centers. Here's a list of, MLE players, right? Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Quentin Grimes, right? Bruce Brown. All sound great, but how are you going to do it? So from an asset standpoint, we have one first-round pick that we can trade. We have a few pick swaps. And again, you have to take this into account that Luka's on the team now. So that 20, I believe it's a 31 pick. How good is it going to be? How good are these swaps going to be in the next few years? Right? We're trying to be good. We're going to be we're going to have a floor that's going to be decent. I don't think we're going to be a bad team moving forward, right? Even with the pieces we have today. But we have about $43 million in expiring contracts, right? We got Rui is an expiring contract, Gabe Vincent, Maxi Kleba, Marcus Morris, Shake Milton is non-guaranteed money, right? Those are our big expiring deals. You have Dalton Connect. That's there as the young prospect, right? That should have been a lottery pick, fell to 17. Could he be someone that a team wants to develop or has the time to develop? And then, there's Austin Reaves, right? He's probably our most highly regarded player, especially at his salary, but there's caveats to him too. We don't have a full mid-level exception just yet, right? I believe LeBron has to take that pay cut for us to unlock the MLE. And if you do unlock the MLE, there's hard cap rules at the first apron, the second apron as well. The CBA is very complicated, right? if he takes a pay cut, you could get the biannual exception too. There's that. We have a taxpayer mid-level exception that's only about $5 million right now. So and we have things to work out. We have 1 second-round pick this year, right? So 55th pick in the draft. So you start to see when you're taking all these kind of pieces, how do we even get to building out a full roster, right? There's DFS's player option that we need to kind of figure out. But it's really going to be working around the margins. And Rob is going to have to hit on veteran minimum players. We can't get around it, right? We have to see, does Luka have that effect to bring in some people on a discount? I mean, I want to stay away from players on this episode. I want to kind of get into setting the stage. But the assets that we have isn't a lot, right? I mean, throwing out, like, we saw that, there's the Giannis rumors out there. And we'll have a show where we talk about what could be a potential package, but there's not much you're playing with. Expiring contracts are big. They're useful, but it's usually, with some draft capital as well too, which we don't have a lot of, right? So it's not going to be an easy offseason. I get kind of surprised when people think we're just going to assemble this team that's just remotely different from what we had in the playoffs, and it's just that much more complete, right? It doesn't work that way. And to be fair, the free agent market is slim pickings. It's slim pickings. There's no highly regarded two-way player out in the market, right? One, we don't even have money to sign these players. So we have these exceptions, like I told you, depending on what our cap sheet looks like, right? But that's, even if we unlock the MLE, right, that's not enough to get you a two-way player that is highly regarded, that's going to change or move the needle on our team, right? The last MLE player was Gabe Vincent. It was Lonnie Walker. It was Montrezl Harrell. Like, where did all these people go? Kendrick Nunn, right? Like, these guys that we signed with these exceptions, I mean, how many have really panned out or were needle movers, right? So we have to temper our expectations a bit. Not to say something big can't get done. It's just going to take, depth on our roster and some key players to probably get it. And that gets into kind of my last point for this episode is what are kind of the dominoes we need to look out for this offseason before we get into players, right? The centers that we want to look for. But it starts with LeBron James. He's got a player option. And it's about 50 or so million. It occupies quite a bit of our cap space, rightfully so. I mean, let's put it this way. I don't want to put an indictment on LeBron James right now. Like, he was fantastic last season. He was an anchor on our defense with no AD, right? And we saw him play off ball. I think the offense could have been better between him and Luka. We didn't see great synergy, but there were stretches where it really worked. But he is, from a statistical standpoint, he is worth 50 million, right? But you kind of have to question at this point where, he's on his last year, maybe two max of his career, right? Eventual retirement. Bronny's already here. What's your objective? What's your angle? It's easy. Take a pay cut. Just take a pay cut. Why aren't you taking the pay cut? We just talked about value, right? He's valued at something based on the production, his output, right? Any other player that's producing at that statistical value, take the age out of it, gets these bigger contracts. So it's not easy for him to take the pay cut. But my question is, for LeBron, what is the angle, right? He could opt into the 50 million. We'll have very limited exceptions. Even if we want to make a trade, most likely our trade is going to be, we would try to aim to trade Vincent, Kleba, Morris, the non-guaranteed money if we pick up Shake, maybe the pick to see if we can add to the core that we have of Rui, Reaves, Luka, DFS, and LeBron, right? But that's still not getting you what you need. Then you're going to fill out, you have a taxpayer mid-level exception, and then vet mins. That's it, right? So him opting in would limit us in terms of that. That's kind of that one scenario, right? So, and then other people are talking about, hey, does he opt out? We don't want him. Let's just retire, go somewhere else. That doesn't do anything for us. Let's get that straight. What that does is give us, I'd say 10 to 12, 13 million. I have to look at the exact numbers in cap space, and then there's a room exception. You're not going to pick up needle moving players to fill in that lack of production. If we want to punt a season and have a clean reset and really hone in on Luka and Reaves and the players that we still have as a core, maybe we start that chapter. I'm not sure how good we're going to be. I think Luka and Reaves can win you games. We'll have to see how Luka gets in shape, right? That's a big deal for this offseason. But in terms of adding players, it's not going to do anything to move the needle. So that option, I think, is not feasible unless it was some opt-out, sign and trade, and then we're going to something crazy. We're going into those, can he go back to the Cavs rumors? Does he want to be a part of the Warriors? Can we bring players back to that? Even then, what are you going to get back in those packages, right? There's a couple players in Cleveland that I would love, but who knows if that would even be a situation, right? So in regards to, pay cut and going back to what's LeBron's angle? If he wants to have a genuine opportunity to be a contender, it's going to take a pay cut, similar to kind of what he was doing last year. He had kind of a hit list, right? Give me Clay, give me DeRozan. Jonas was in there. But for him to take that pay cut would be a big, big leap. Quite honestly, I would want it to be a pay cut for a 1-year deal. The 1+1, and I'm hearing rumors right now, it'll be a 1+1 for 100-some million. I feel like that it's going to hold the team hostage for a couple years unless he decides to retire and not even pick up that second-year option, right? A 1-year deal, yes, we would like him to take a pay cut for the simple fact of, can we put together a team for you so we can win, right? We know he's a billionaire, right? He's done his thing, but that is going to be an important piece to figure out quickly. He can't wait. We need to present a roster to Luka in August for Luka's extension. That needs to happen, right? But in order for him to be confident in the team, we need to have a killer offseason. And that starts with LeBron, right? Ideally, it's a pay cut for 1 year. I think that it'll be too optimistic, to just do a 1-year deal. We're not worried about, the second year. He announces his retirement. He gets his send-off party, his retirement tour. And the Lakers have, some assets at their disposal to create a team, because you can trade the MLE. You can do that now in this new CBA, right? So it's going to be very interesting to see what LeBron does and how quickly he decides to do it. And honestly, the worst worst thing that could happen is, he does a 1+1 for 100 or so million, 52 million each year. And now we're stuck. At that point, I don't know what you really put together for Luka that's going to be a winner or even a contender. We have to figure out how to give him the best opportunity to win. And then LeBron's a big piece to that. And him just leaving doesn't really solve anything either until the following year. So LeBron is going to be interesting. I'm hearing a lot of things about, we should trade Reaves. He didn't have a good playoffs. That's for sure. He didn't have a great playoffs. He had his toe injury and big toe injury in game 3. We expected more. Was he terrible? Completely terrible? Sure. Can he get better? Yes. He had a great regular season. 25-5, 22-5-4, I think, when Luka came. Can he get better defensively? Sure. He can get in the weight room, get a little more physical. Athleticism has a ceiling. But, there's a lot of merits, and he can get you through a season. And I think there's still synergy that can be had with Luka. But the biggest thing is about, we're going to trade Austin. And this is my last thing to kick off the offseason, right? Dan Wakey put out an article about, the Lakers really pride themselves on, having this homegrown talent, Austin Reaves, which I agree with. That shouldn't be the reason on why you don't trade him if a right package comes. But again, the right package has to come. And Dan Wakey even said, it has to be for a high caliber player that can grow with Luka over time. Not some one and done type of thing, you know, in the moment, but something that has longevity, right? And there's only a few of those players. Now, I agree with that. If we're going to trade Austin, I love Austin. That's my guy, but I'm not opposed. We can't be married to these role players if we have a chance to get better or to complete our team in different ways that's going to maximize the strengths that we have at the top level, right? But the kicker with this is Austin Reaves is eligible for an extension this summer. 4 years, 90 million is what we can give him. But all indications point to him rejecting that extension. I think it's a little low in terms of what he's worth. That comes out to about 22.5 million, right? I think he's a low 30s player. Some might, you tell me, is a low 30s for Austin Reaves too much? Is it too little? Because it could go up to 42.5 if he decides to opt out and become a free agent after this season. But that right there is the kicker. To trade Austin Reaves, a team would essentially be getting an expiring contract. And they would have to gamble on, we're going to trade you this asset, this great player, and we have to find a way to convince Austin that this is his home. They may have to pay a little bit more of a premium. They're going to get his bird rights to go over the cap. But they need to be very confident that he's going to stay on the team. And that's what makes trading Austin tricky. Even if we wanted to trade him, a team's going to have to want to inherit what is someone that could leave the team. So when you take that into consideration and we talk about a team, they can extend him. There's only a 5% and an 8% kicker that they can put on his current contract if they want to extend him. And the 8% is after 6 months. So he's going to opt out and be a free agent. That's what a team would be trading for. You add the first round pick, maybe you add Dalton Connect, Rui, and you go see what player you can get because it gives a team flexibility at the least after a year, some assets. And if Austin does decide to leave, they have that flexibility. But, just having cap space doesn't really mean much if you're a small market team or a team that doesn't really attract free agents, right? So trading Austin Reaves becomes tricky, but then it's also for Rob, if we're going to pay him 30 some odd million to start in his new deal, that 25-5, is that worth 30 million? Is it not worth 30 million? Right? And that's going to be a big decision that the team has to make. I think there's longevity with Austin. I do think he's going to be a great player. I do think he's a fringe all-star. It could be me being a Laker homer. But I think he has a couple more levels to him that we haven't seen. But just saying to trade Austin, you guys got to remember, it's not going to be that easy. It's not going to be that easy because there's so many caveats to it, right? So there's a lot to think about in this offseason, and we'll do another show starting to get into more of the players. But again, it starts with identity and then aligning on that identity. What type of team do we want to be? And really, what type of team do we need to be around Luka? Maybe even Austin. That's fringe right now, but it's Luka. What team do we need to put around Luka for us to be successful for the next 3, 4, 5 years, right? And then they need to align on those types of principles, and then you start to unpack the players that meet that identity, right? We know we need a center, 100%, probably 2. I don't think Jackson Hayes is going to be on the roster. We need two-way players, but what team doesn't need two-way players? We need to figure out that player development program because that's going to be critical. Getting those young players developed that have that athleticism just need to be polished. Unlike what we did with Koloko, Jemison Goodwin was a good player, that we got late. But we need to find those gems. And it might even be a gem that's our third center on the roster or even our backup that come from that type of feeder system, right? Because you're not going to get that top tier two-way unless you really gut the roster and all the expirings go Austin Reaves and that pick, right? We'll see what that would yield. We know it's not going to be easy. We don't have a lot of vehicles to, facilitate a trade in terms of exceptions, in terms of draft assets, right? Again, we only have one first round pick, a couple swaps, and that are decent, or could be decent, and some, I think, 1 second rounder. You know, and you have Dalton Connect. So we're limited on assets. Rob's going to have to work around the margins. We need some veteran minimums to hit. That's going to be a lot of our roster. And it needs to be the right vet mins. We'll see what kind of quality we can get. And then it's not going to be easy to trade Reaves. It's not. And it starts with LeBron James's decision on what he wants to do, because that's going to tell us a lot about where our cap sheet lands. And that's going to tell us what type of players we can go after. So we can't even get into the players just yet because we need to understand the pieces. And again, we have $43 million of expiring contracts, which are big. One of them is Rui, and he was a key piece to us in the playoffs. So if you're trading him, you better get a piece that's not only going to fill his void, but optimize something that we didn't see before in our offense because there was that gap, right? So it's a it's going to be a complicated offseason. And I don't think you want to break it up too much. I don't think we're very far away. There are clear gaps and holes that we saw get exposed in the playoffs. But, I think there's some room for optimism. But we'll see how this goes. That was a recap. Again, give me your comments. What do you think our identity is going to be? Where are you focusing on in the offseason? What do you think about Braun and Reaves? Let me know what you think. Like it or hate it. Drop a comment and debate it. And I'll see y'all soon. Peace.